Hey, all, it's Kyle. Welcome back to TuneDig. Obviously, it feels crazy to share a lighthearted conversation about music in light of the past 2 weeks, or really to do anything other than focusing all of our energy on protecting Black lives and capitalizing on the progress made by all of you who have spoken up, donated, volunteered, voted, most importantly, taken to the streets. But rest and joy are necessary to sustain ourselves and continue the fight. And plus, we recorded this episode before the protests even went down. You'll notice my beard is considerably longer in the episode than it is in this intro. Even 2 weeks ago feels like a simpler time. 2 weeks before 2 weeks ago seems like a simpler time even than that. We began the TuneDig radio series as a respite from the madness of COVID. The idea was to focus on staying connected to each other by sharing the small joy of songs we love. Nothing more, nothing less. So whether you watch or listen to the whole episode, or you spin the playlist on Spotify, or you just decide to take 5 minutes out of your day to laugh at two idiot friends sharing some joy in this crazy world, we hope that it does you a little bit of good. So from here, let us know what theme or topic might help you, give you some joy right now, help you process the moment, and we'll make sure to make that our next playlist. We love you, and we're so proud of all that so many of you are doing to fight for a better world. In the meantime, enjoy these songs. You're listening to TuneDig, a podcast for music lovers.
Episode 2 of TuneDig Radio, TuneDig in the time of COVID. And if you're just jumping in on this one because you're a friend of Cliff's and he shared this episode, we teed up what this thing is in the first one. We're not going to belabor that guy. But this, I think, will be one of the few times where we have taken the same prompt and both put our own spin on it, or both responded to it. So these are some of your favorite instrumentals. I shared some of mine in the previous episode. You got some barn burner picks here. I think you have a fair amount of what would be like on the objective list of best instrumentals, but there's definitely some through lines that are specific to you as well. So
for sure.
Talk me through, you got the prompt, and what were some of the first things that came into your mind? Like, oh, I got to have this. And like, how did it shake out for you? And I'm asking that kind of interviewer type question because it took a little bit of goading to get you to do this format. Because for years, for the decade and a half that I've known you, you have like a visceral response to the identity crisis of making a playlist. You like do opposite of High Fidelity, where you're just like, I'm not even going to try to catalog it. I don't want to do it. This is not an exercise I enjoy. So talk me through the headspace a little bit, and then let's get into the songs.
You know, like we talked about before, I think constraints always help me. So we talked about the constraint of just a throwback to when we grew up. So using the approximate time frame of a CDR. I think yours was about 8 minutes over. So we're going to say approximate maybe. But yeah, using that like
that hard cap used to burn us back in the day, having to cut
so
one,
much,
maybe two critical tracks. Yeah.
You'd put all of them together and then go to burn it. And it'd be like, you know, because that's how computers used to work, right? You would do all the work. And then right when you went to do the thing you needed to do and then walk away from the computer for 6 hours, it'd be like, no, actually, you jacked this entire thing up. Yeah, you're going to need to start over, maybe get a new HP. Yeah.
And they'd be like, you're over by 4 seconds in 30 milliseconds. Bro, come on.
Yeah, so I would say I've got a couple of kind of approaches I use to make this happen at all, but the constraint of it can't really be more than 15 songs or so, no matter what, even if I pick normal length songs, is a good, helpful way to keep me concentrating. So we'll hit 2 or 3 kind of themes throughout the playlist. I think that'll help me kind of explain the way I approach instrumentals in general. you and I had some things we agreed on in terms of what an instrumental is, and then some things we decided to just kind of apply to ourselves. So for me, what I'm not going to include in any of this is jazz, is classical, and is post-rock. There may be some mild exception-ish parts, but for the most part, like, this is not an entire CDR of John Coltrane, so setting all that to the side, right? But in doing that, I think it brings out some of the things that I loved about music growing up, and things that have really affected me in learning to play guitar over the last 15 years at this point. It feels like you never actually know how to use it. You just continuously learn how to try to not be embarrassed by it, and then continue to be embarrassed by it anyway. So you're going to see like a lot of guitar work for sure. Like, I came to love guitar lines as the protagonist in an instrumental story type weirdness. And I like to pick apart the different instrumentations or instruments inside of a song, and give them kind of roles, especially in an instrumental song. So to me, I'm always a person anyway where, like, I mean, this because of Every Time I Die, right? If I don't like the vocals, it ruins everything entirely forever. I can't do it, right? And like, I'm a huge metal nerd, so that eliminates 80% of what's already out there anyway, right?
Yep.
So this really helps me like fall in love with the music itself and look past vocal choices one way or another, even to the point to where I think a lot of metal to me at this point is vocal as an extra instrument instead of as the focal point like it is in a lot of songs. So I think you'll see storylines told, especially with guitars really leading and then other things kind of accompanying it. But then also instrumentals in terms of more ephemeral, ethereal approaches to world making, like we talk about, right? Like building an environment that goes a little harder than just being totally ambient and passive. I never really have anything like that. And so even the ones we talk about that are a little spacier, like I'll have really specific reasons that I enjoy them. So I love being able to talk about this kind of stuff. And honestly, the first one to kick off with is by far the easiest one. I was blessed in my life, not only with privilege, obviously, look at this guy, but Frankenstein by Edgar Winter Group was the first song I ever remember hearing. I remember the moment that I heard it the first time. Yeah.
Huh.
Absolutely my first memory. Now, I probably do actually, if I wanted to, remember what happened before that, but I don't want to because this fits my story way better. So I've effectively now blocked it out psychologically.
Never let the truth get in the way of a good story.
That's right. Especially, I don't have any more interesting things to tell anyway, so we got to start with something cool. But like, I remember my dad showing me this song really specifically, and it was a neat experience to be a kid and hear this because I didn't have 10, 20, 30 years of context that told me it wasn't normal to have a song like Frankenstein. A totally instrumental rock song that was really popular that gets played on the radio. It's totally normal to me. And in fact, was like the foundation of the way that I experienced a lot of music. It also was fun because I had such a simple mindset, right, as a kid towards this music. So like, I had no idea for a really long time that he was playing a synthesizer instead of this being like two guitars, and just all the crazy stuff that Edgar Winter did. But this is like, it's such an easy one that everyone remembers, such a great one to kick off with. And I love how absolutely weird it feels to get the 3-ish minutes into the song and have it, for all intents and purposes, totally end and then come back. Man, I hope that everyone who just heard that has actually heard this song before. Really, really hope this is nobody's first time hearing Frankenstein. But regardless, one of the things that we talked about in the last episode was putting things together like this is not only a weird exercise for us, because it might not be the way we always think about music, but it'll give people a new way to hear it in the context of the other songs in the list, right? And I think one thing this will do, if you really go and like we're hoping you do, like actually stop when the music might play on the podcast, go play the entire song and come back. That whole thing we talked about where like the song practically ends, plays a bunch of weird noises that morphs into a beat and then comes back and the song starts again. First of all, that's how all music should work. No question. This is all songs should be written this way. But the reason it's called Frankenstein is because it's essentially like a 20 or 30 minute collection of jams that they had no reasonable way to put together into a song. So they chopped it together and called it Frankenstein.
I did not ever know that. That makes sense. It's pretty schizophrenic.
Yeah.
But it works.
Right. And one of the things you mentioned in the last episode, and because we're trying not to make these 8-hour podcast episodes, we didn't go too far into, but like, I think one key thing that pops out about instrumentals and plays out here when you're talking about literally like chopping together different riffs and stuff, the bass always plays an important role in an instrumental, at least in the very classic rock format, right? And so like when you go back and listen to the song again, especially if you're a dork and got really excited about the idea that this is a bunch of riffs taped together now, like go back and listen, because it does actually feel like totally separate songs duct taped together, but the bass is the thing that carries through and makes sense of the whole thing. And like, to me, that's the kind of stuff I love. Like that's the stuff I want to dive into and listen to over and over again. And there's just a million things I could talk about this song. Did you like Edgar Winter at all, like when you were growing up, or I don't know now?
I think that, so we both grew up on classic rock radio, right? Like the stations in our hometown were Z93 and 96 Rock.
Oh yeah.
And it was like every weekend I'd be going to travel for baseball games, or like we'd be hanging out at the pool. And it was always 96 Rock, and my dad would always play Name the Artist. So like, I think our cores are pretty different places. Your dad put you on to a lot of stuff that I think my dad maybe thought was kind of nerdy. But we both had like cool classic Southern dad, like put the hand over the shoulder, teach you how to change your oil. And here's Edgar Winter Group, or here's, Led Zeppelin, here's Freebird. It was very similar, but it manifested itself in very different ways because of the personalities of our dads. So all that to say, I always really liked Frankenstein, but it was just like a song on the radio. Like I didn't have like a personal experience with it.
2 extra little tidbits out of this that I think are really fun, and who knows if I'll ever get a chance to talk about this again. But first of all, the original name for the song, which I'm really glad they didn't go with, Double Drum Song, which is I don't think we'd be talking about it today if it had been called Double Drum Song. But it's again worth paying attention to the percussion in this entire song, because it's not just 2 drummers, it's drums and percussion. Edgar Winter is playing a handful of the different instruments that are recorded here, including some percussion. And like the whole Double Drum Song was like the one thing they wanted to keep was the drum solo, which is insane, and also like one of the coolest parts of the song, right? The other thing we can either thank or blame Edgar Winter for is essentially the keytar. He was actually the first person to strap a synthesizer around his neck, and I don't like. We talk about Imagine the Meeting. Like I really can't imagine that particular one. Just like I feel like really, like trapped in by the keyboard. I wonder if I could just like, put it on my neck and walk around with it. Would I feel?
I'm on my phone on a mountain. Something like that. I mean, Edgar and Johnny Winter, a little bit unusual looking. Super, super talented, and like rarely in the classic rock conversation, but both of those dudes, man. Johnny a little more of a like blues hard edge traditionalist, and Edgar more of the like prog weird leaning type stuff. But if you're into guitar music of any stripe, like you have got to check both Winter Brothers out separately and together.
And Edgar Winter plays the keyboard like a guitar all the time. It's awesome.
Yeah.
So, okay. So that's like 30 something years of Frankenstein related information condensed into a few minutes. So let's move on to something that was probably even...
For the record, before we move on, I just want to say that is the number one song that I think of when I think of you. They're like, give us a Cliff song. Frankenstein by Edgar Winter Group.
As it should be. So that was a song that influenced me, obviously. It kind of like framed the whole way I think about music in general. Also, put in a pre-existing soft spot for instrumentals. I think we talked about kind of having like a reserves playlist in case one or the other person doesn't put some important ones on there.
Yep.
So I gotta make sure that Rumble gets played. So Link Ray and his Rayman. This I really don't like saying it now that I think about it. The cadence of Link Ray and his Rayman doesn't feel good to me. But anyway,
noodles.
Yeah,
Link Ray and his semen.
I just
nautical themed Link Ray songs.
So like that was the thing I was trying to avoid saying by implying it instead of saying it,
Oh no, you can count on me to beat it over the head.
I do. So Rumble is awesome for a million reasons, but the most important ones, and one of the reasons I put it kind of here in the playlist, first of all, it's a huge badass song, which at the time, or now, listening back to the song, I don't know, sounds like early rock and roll, sounds like a dude with swagger, whatever. This song was banned. This song was an instrumental song that was banned because somebody thought it would incite riots. Like, just like thinking back about when people thought the drums would summon the devil if you played them wrong. Like these little nuggets of American and world life.
Played a record backwards that contained hidden messages and stuff.
Yeah. Just like these little snapshots of like, hey, remember when you sit at home with yourself each day that there's probably something that you believe really strongly that we're all going to laugh about in like 20 years as insane. This is one of them. So, but not only was this song itself like banned and people were scared for whatever reason, but this song specifically impacted music in an exponential way. Like it changed the whole landscape of what we ended up with, especially in terms of classic rock. There would be none of this stuff, including Led Zeppelin or The Who or any of these other bands, unless Link Ray had come first. And I knew about this song because it's one of these that it's embedded in you somewhere. If you've listened to enough music, you've heard it for sure and might not recognize it. But the part in It Might Get Loud, where Jimmy Page is just like, he's got the record and he's like moving around to it. And he talks about it from the perspective, when you really listen to those words he uses, he talks about all these different entrances that Link Ray plays with his guitar, right? And like, it's such an interesting way to capture how guitarists ended up thinking about their own instrument as electric guitars were becoming a thing at all. Because what he's pointing out is in this song, which is otherwise like really simple, that like you play through the stanza, you do something kind of different and weird at the end of the stanza, and then you kind of like back up, reset, and then come at it again with your guitar in like a very slightly different way. And it sounds really simplistic now, but like these guys who are our guitar idols now were kids listening to this song, and there'd never been anything like it before. So Rumble is not only worth listening to for sure, but also gives me a really cool way to set up the rest of this playlist.
I think Rumble is the ultimate argument for feel and the importance of feel, right? Because you downplayed it a couple of times. Like it's you maybe can't hear the gravity of it now, but like watch an old video of Link Ray. In fact, Dust to Digital, that incredible account, just posted a live video. It was Link Ray's birthday or something recently, and they're playing it live. And one of the beautiful things about Link is like he was one of those artists that always let it just kind of take on the character of the evening. And it was like borderline sludgy the way that he was playing it. They were like, they had the tempo slowed down a little and were really bringing out the nastiness of that. Wow.
Yeah.
And it's just all about attitude. One of the comments was basically like, Link Ray embodies every aspect of the bad boy that you've always wanted to be because of rock and roll. Like, you know, dark sunglasses, leather, cigarettes, like strut and walk. Rumble is like one of the hardest songs. And that's a hill that I would die on because it is so simple and he just puts so much elbow grease into the feel, right? You don't need to overdo the like musical structural flex. He's doing a really simple thing, but he just plays the shit out of it.
Yeah.
And it ends up being really successful because of that.
Yep. Literally, the strum direction sounds entirely different because of how much weight he's putting into it. It's just, that song keeps giving. So after that, we're going to have a pocket of just straight Guitar Hero instrumentals because I love this stuff. Not literally the game, although sometimes possibly the game too, in one or two of these
next
scenarios.
One for sure.
Yeah. So now we're going to talk about my favorite Allman Brothers song that's off of a record that we're not going to talk about when we have to talk about the Allman Brothers because we already did that and there are more important records to talk about. But so Jessica is first of all only the unedited version, not like an uncensored version, but like the original canonical full length version, just like Frankenstein.
7.5 or something.
That is the only correct version. Yeah.
Versus the radio version that's 3.5, 4.
Yeah, you can't just like cut blues piano solos like that.
Right.
It's inappropriate. So, but this is such a great example though of taking different guitar inspirations and making a story out of them where you're using the guitar to do something. You move through it. It feels like it has movement. And even though, you know, this was more of a Dickie Betts doing a Django Reinhardt love fest situation, right? It's really specifically how the whole thing was written. At the same time, like coming out of that whole Link Ray thing that we just talked about, like just using Django Reinhardt fingerings and stylings are one part of it, but on the other hand, truly trying to create a song that's sustained completely or almost entirely by a lead guitar for 10 minutes or whatever, even if it was rare at the time, very few people ever did it like this. And it's something I play this song 3 or 4 times a week myself, just because it's like playing a video game. It's like entering a whole different world. So it's worth setting aside the time to just listen to how the piano kind of creates a situation for the guitar to go off and tell its own story and a journey. And then just, as we'll see in a few of these songs, actually, one of my favorite things about Jessica that gets pulled out because it's an instrumental is that it goes way far out, just like Frankenstein, basically. It goes way out and then it comes back to the main thing before the whole song ends. And like, it's a really interesting and key way to appreciate some of these more lively instrumentals, I think.
But rather than a stop start or some clear demarcation of going from one thing back to the like original motif, there, and I would have never thought of it at this level of detail if you hadn't harped on it so many times for so long. Like, you always talk about that transition, like the really notey transition where they get back to the main thing, like taking the main staircase back down in the building. They do it in a very like Fred Astaire way compared to when you listen to The Dead or something. A lot of times it's like push, 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 push. release from the tension and then you go back into the main thing, they find their way back to the main road in a really elegant way. And that's one of the cool things about that song is they never lose the cadence of it at all.
Yeah. And that's the strength of a good riff and an instrumental song. Like if they're willing to go all the way out and come back to it, it's killer. And it's happening without a vocal hook. Like that's what makes this stuff incredible to me. Like it's really hard to do it.
It's some of the only non-Dwayne Allmans worth holding up to that same level.
Definitely taking, and I hope no offense is taken by anyone in the band Darkest Hour, but we're going to take a step back from absolute classics and legends into a band that should, though, be considered a legend in the metal community. Darkest Hour has been doing it for decades, man. So Veritas Agotas is, first of all, a song that I loved anyway, because it's metal bands love sticking weird, really long instrumental things at the end of their records, but very few of them are worth it because they can't bring themselves to not do something really stupid before the whole thing closes out. And this song cycles through itself like 4 or 5 different times and takes on a slightly different tone and gets a little bit bigger every time. So one of the reasons I love listening to this one is it's long and it takes you through the journey, and then you kind of get like an interlude. You'll get some piano, you'll get some acoustic, and then they'll pick back up kind of like halfway into where the previous one started, and they'll keep going from there and they'll build up. And then by the time you get to the last few minutes of this thing, like the guitar work just like the way that they come in with some of those bends and really give the guitar like a voice itself. By the end of it, it's not just noodling or scales. Like there's a lot of really almost like blues type soloing that happens at the end, but it's building on stuff you've already heard before, and it's just Kyle, you and I think had a conversation about me not using the word epic in every single podcast for a while, but I'm gonna break that and come back. Like the song is epic. Like it's the put this on and go on the journey to Middle Earth type thing.
Yeah. It's got a Greek mythology thing about it. You may or may not remember this conversation. I'm surprised that I do because I remember so few. But when we were in high school umpiring baseball together, you told me about this idea that you had for an instrumental record where it starts with just the slow hammering of an anvil, and it's the sound of the building of a society, and you score the building of a society, and it builds up from utopia into chaos and greed and war, and it gets really noisy, and then it all implodes. And then it starts again with the hammering of an anvil to show that all life and society is cyclical and all that. And we were like 16, and that absolutely exploded my head that was a thing that you could do with music, right? Because you were a music student, and I was a kid that had taken a couple of years of piano lessons, and it didn't occur to me that it could have that kind of a classical arc. And so with songs like the Darkest Hour song, like I'm always looking for the person that actually wrote that song that you described to me when we were teenagers. And this is very much in that vein where it's like, you're supposed to picture a whole world and a linear narrative that goes with it. And they do a really good job of, you fill it in with whatever's in your head, but it's got that kind of grand societal scale to it. Like you're supposed to be watching a big war scene, like it pulls out on a big kind of macro drone level, and you're just like, whoa, it's got that feel.
Yeah. But yeah, if you can't make it through this whole thing, at least skip to about 10 minutes and 30 seconds in so you can catch the last guitar solo come in. It's just everything's good. And they would play this live, and just to really put the nail in the coffin of how good this song must be for me to stick up for it here. This is also the first time I ever live in person saw a guitarist put an acoustic guitar on a stand so that they could play it while they played another guitar. And that's never cool. Never, never acceptable. Yeah. But it made this song work because they built so many layers in, and it was awesome to see it live.
That's like Keytar for Yngwie Malmsteen people.
That sounds horrendous. So moving into what feels like lighter fare, but I actually feel like the guitarists of Darkest Hour and Eric Johnson share a fair amount in common. One of the things that they do similarly is they look and sound like they're playing something relatively simple, and it is not. It definitely is not. And it is played with precision and perfection. Like Darkest Hour is riddled with that in every song. There's at least one guitar part that's absolutely impossible to play that you've never noticed before. But Eric Johnson, so he was known, if you know an Eric Johnson song, you probably know Cliffs of Dover. And that's fine. It was in Guitar Hero. It's a good song. I don't care who likes it. It's really great. And one of the reasons it's awesome is because Eric Johnson was known for being a person who was so meticulous that it took him months and years to write a song. This one he wrote in 5 minutes. And the thing that took him months was...
like the Little Dicky of guitar.
We never get to catch my reactions on video when you say shit like that. Now I'm trapped. But so like he writes this song, and then he even said, it took me a while to achieve the facility to play it right. I was trying to work out the fingerings and how I wanted particular notes to hang over notes. Like this guy he goes inside of the music that he writes, and he will not come out until it's perfect by his own standards. And if you get a chance to see him live, like even if you don't like his music, it's worth seeing it because it is pristine. Like the cleanliness. This is not like a Hendrix Page situation where they're there for the mood and the feel of it, and sloppy guitar is like a mood. Eric Johnson has never ever in his entire life played a wrong note on a guitar somehow.
It's sheet music as hell.
It's so wild.
I remember when you went and saw him, I think you posted on the account, like, turns out Cliffs of Dover was the one on Guitar Hero because it was the easiest one to play.
So true. But it's also like a really good instrumental because it maintains a really simple melody that would usually be carried by vocals. And like ignore, like he does an awesome guitar intro in general, but wait till you get to the actual hook part of it. Like it's almost a standard chorus. It's poppy. And he does this incredible job of layering guitars on top of one another and telling a story through the whole thing being so pristine that you can hear all of these different layers. Take the pristineness of that guitar playing, change the rhythm a little bit. It's actually not too crazy. Just grab some Latin influence for your rhythm and put it in front of another pristine guitar player, and you've got Santana. And like this is another great Santana track. First of all, just Santana tracks in general usually worth your time, unless we're talking about some of the later collabs that he was trying to do. But like
Don't
this
you
one,
talk down on 1999 Smooth from the Grammy award-winning album Supernatural featuring Rob Thomas of Matchbox 20?
I was trying to toss it to you. I didn't know if you were going to hit it or not. So thank you.
Razor's Edge.
So,
Man, this one's a hot one.
oh yeah. So this one was written by Santana after he witnessed a jazz saxophonist playing in the street outside of his apartment. And he said he would say later that he felt like I am not going to pronounce this right because I don't know, whatever. But Samba Pati. But he said this was the first song that he felt he could call his own at all. So not only is it an instrumental, not only is Santana amazing anyway, but like it's rare to get a glimpse of like when did Santana kind of become the thing that we know Santana as today. And like this is a really good encapsulation of that, not only because the song is awesome, but because you can see like that was a pretty cyclical thing where he would just get inspired by something really simple and then write something really simple out of it. But like because of the talent that pours out of that guy, you get a song like this just because he heard somebody playing saxophone on the way home one day. So like if it felt good to bring in, you know, there's probably a number of Santana ones we could bring in, but this one felt like a really good one to sit in the context of those other songs we've talked about, where like instrumentals tend to be these places where guitarists especially are like pushing something new, and it gives them a chance to introduce something that they might not, you know, be able to do otherwise while they're trying to write the song.
And Carlos Santana has such a distinctive sound. We talked about Eddie Hazel in Funkadelic last episode, where like when other people could play it the same way somebody else could sing a Frank Sinatra song, but one note in, you know who it is and you know it belongs to them.
Yep.
And I don't know, it's not quite scales that he relies on. It's not quite tones that he goes to. It's a little bit of all of those things, and it's none of those things. It is some degree of intangibles, but he has such a signature sound, and he's so expressive. He's such an emotive player. Again, like Eddie Hazel, where it's like you don't need vocals on this song because it is so vocal. It's so emotive. It says so much. He deserves his roses, man.
So we're gonna pick up speed on this journey, but that was a good intro, because one of the things I think makes Santana different is just the rhythmic backing that he's using to play a guitar style on top of, right? It's not, you can't just like copy and paste another drum style in there and it would make a Santana, but like his intricacy with the rhythm specifically like created this whole new guitar style. So pretty obviously, like Led Zeppelin is a great example of this. So Moby Dick is an awesome one to bring in here because it pushes even further into that rhythm portion of instrumentals. So yeah, we started with a lot of like Guitar Hero type stuff, but like we can draw out some of the other songs that push on other instruments and still make for really interesting instrumentals, right? Like an extended drum solo. Again, we've already had it in Frankenstein, but now we're coming back with Moby Dick. Like the rhythm section of Led Zeppelin made Jimmy Page exponentially more recognizable at the very least.
For sure.
Right. So like that interplay is an awesome one to bring up here and point out that, you know, not only does a guitar take you on a journey, but a lot of times like the rhythm really can, especially when you got somebody like Bonzo that can push and pull so dramatically and kind of make you feel like you're actually walking through a thing or listening to a story.
You can cut the whole actual drum solo part out of the song, and it's still a great exhibit A for John Bonham is the best rock drummer of all time, because of that call and response thing and just the unpredictability of the fills, and it was just so effortless, and he played so hard, and the groove drives and swings and like he's able to do so many things rhythmically at the same time, and it all is sort of this like in cartoons when two people are fighting and it's just the big cloud with arms and legs sticking out, like that is what his drum sound looks like to me if you were to like kind of chart it out. And this is a great example where he goes into this little fills like and Page plays along with it, right? Like they had that very kind of cosmic intuitive thing where they played into each other really well, which is insane when you consider what an unpredictable drummer and human being Bonzo was. And so it's on full display here.
I hate myself a little bit from going from Bonzo to Van Halen, but it is a really good example, though, of, I
just sent you that story where Eddie Van Halen pulled a gun on Fred Durst and you were like, I don't care about either of these people. Don't send me shit like this. So anyway, go on.
I can imagine infinity situations where exactly that story would have been necessary. So it was uninteresting to me what the details were. Like, of course he did. How could you possibly hang out with Fred Durst for that long without eventually needing to do that?
Come on.
So, but I don't have to talk a lot about Eruption. I think it's a good example of instrumentals as it relates to pushing on one instrument. So agreed that you could take the drum solo out of Moby Dick if you want to, but we shouldn't. And it's one of the best parts of it, and it's all drums, right? Hey. You heard it here first, folks. You could remove parts of a song, but why? So, but like
hot take alert.
It's gonna come back to bite me when I apply for jobs later. So Eruption is great because it's just Van Halen not trying to write songs. And look, I like Jump too, and I'll defend it, and that's fine. I don't feel shame. I don't regret it. But Eruption is my favorite.
I'm more of a Panama guy. If we're doing Van Halen guilty pleasures.
We're not doing it. But like
Margaritaville for $500, Alec.
But as we're increasingly have to do these days, we can separate out the work from the terrible individual. And so like this is just straight Van Halen guitar work with nothing behind it. It's just what happens when you give Van Halen a guitar and an overdriven amp. And like this is the part of Van Halen that I love. Like I play 5150 amps. Like I love the tone that he could get out of it and the way that it sounds. And Eruption is such a great example of that. And it's short also. So like you don't have to like strap in and go for it for a while. You just kind of like, there's a minute and a half of him doing some stuff. That was neat. Wow, he's a good guitar player. Okay, we move on to the next song now. We never have to talk about Sammy Hagar.
I'm not going to push on this too hard, but I love the inherent irony of you love Eddie Van Halen's guitar tone, and I don't really know what your relationship is to Dimebag Darrell specifically, but like for a long time you've been like, I don't like Pantera. We're going to push on that in some future episodes. I'm going to find a way to do that, but it's just so interesting that you'll like, there are times when you like a thing like that, and then there are times where you're like, absolutely not.
So now that I've given 31 caveats about Van Halen, great. Let's come back to the real people who influence music in positive ways. So coming back to a Hendrix track. Now, I kind of philosophically semi disagree with this track even existing in the public at all. This is true. The posthumously released Hendrix tracks, I don't feel great about. They were not authorized by him. A lot of them were not necessarily designed to be released. And so I like really put my shoulders up really high when I hear about like a new collection of like unreleased Hendrix things coming out. But the blues compilation,
as recently as last year, dude.
I can't.
Why?
Like I like the live recordings, like Atlanta Pop Festival and stuff is awesome. I want to hear that. And like he knew that was being recorded. Anyway, so trying to step out of the Hendrix shoes, I do love everything that's on this blues compilation, and specifically an instrumental version of Born Under a Bad Sign. That song itself, amazing, right? Albert King's guitar work, incredible. The song itself, classic blues song, super memorable, really fun to listen to. But the way that Hendrix works with it purely through his guitar is like the pinnacle of what a great instrumentalist can do with a song without vocals. Like he's literally showing you, I know that you know this song as one with a really like memorable melody line, and I'm going to play through it and around it with guitar work. And it's, this one is like deeply embedded. And we talked last episode about the blues radio show you used to do with John Asante. The only time I was personally ever on the radio was when you played a song from my band that was a semi cover of this cover.
Yep.
Because like this was the version that mattered to me. So
and it was a cover of Albert King, who for my money, in a lot of ways was the best of the Kings. There was BB and Freddie, and Albert had his place in the Pantheon. Huge dude, played a left-handed guitar upside down, a left-handed flying V upside down, held a pipe in his mouth, like an old school Sherlock Holmes pipe while he played. Had a great duet album or whatever collab album with Stevie Ray Vaughan. But just a titanic blues dude. He has an instrumental that I almost put on mine called Function. That was when we would go to breaks in our blues radio show, was the backing song. And I thought about including it and I didn't. But this Hendrix track allows us to give some love to Albert King, who is absolutely a titan.
And not only that, like one more shout to Booker T. Jones, who wrote it.
God, so
everything
good.
flows. Yeah. So stepping down from Hendrix, I think even Fugazi would feel really uncomfortable with following Hendrix on any sort of playlist that's supposed to imply anything.
Your next like 5 in a row, I love this is like me level skitzing out.
So what I love about the Fugazi track is that it starts to reintroduce the, we've done a lot of the more almost like thematic storytelling type of instrumentals, but there, I mentioned there were a couple of waves in this playlist, and like this kind of next wave is more like we can still bring down the punk aesthetic and do the straightforward 4/4 times stuff, and it still makes for interesting music. You can still do a lot with it. You don't have to only do that format to make an instrumental that matters. So Arpeggiator by Fugazi is a really good example of just bringing that down, speeding things up, and making it interesting, like a track that some people might consider a filler, but it's really enjoyable all by itself. we take Fugazi, and we come in with another one that just like absolutely knocked me sideways the first time I ever heard it, and part of it's just because like the whole brand was right on. So Cloud Kicker is a dude who makes music in his apartment essentially, and like these days he's making a lot more like ethereal soundscape collaborative type stuff, and it's all really good. But this first record, Beacons, that he released, and I say first record, it may have not actually been its first record, but it was the first Cloud Kicker record that I saw and was exposed to. And like, I love it because it absolutely takes off at like warp speed and becomes an instrumental track that seems like it would otherwise be the foundation of like yet another metal band that has 3 guitarists, but they use programmed drums. And it sounds like it's going to be one of those, but he gets more and more intricate. Like the riff and how it works with the drums themselves, which admittedly sound like programmed drums, but like the way he masters it and kind of plays with it and writes guitar licks for it, just it makes the whole thing feel like you've got a lot of momentum and that you're moving somewhere really quickly. And to me, like especially Fugazi, Cloud Kicker, like really start to show how you can like bring the punk aesthetic, bring the speed, and still maintain the things that make all these tracks interesting. You don't have to do the intricate guitar work in order to make a song that's interesting itself, right?
And it's interesting that, you know, you mentioned the punk aesthetic, like that's not a normal thing that happens in punk. But it's really not. You think about like when Black Flag did Process of Weeding Out and they did the like kind of free jazz instrumental stuff, that gets soundly rejected because I think the lyrics and the vocals and the talking, the words are such an important part because the music is often so rudimentary. We covered Husker Du in one of our very early episodes. We talked about Zen Arcade. There's a lot of really interesting like instrumental divergence on that record. So it's weird in punk because it's a thing that they all wanted to do was try to be more musical, and it gets compartmentalized into these like little moments. But when you find them where they're just focused on the music, they can be really, really cool. But it's just kind of at odds with like the aesthetic of the way that a lot of those bands put out music.
Yeah, totally, man. That's why I wanted to share Cloud Kicker specifically. Like it kind of opened up a whole little super tiny genre on the internet of like, no, there's some people who are really passionate about doing this kind of clean metal inspired instrumental kind of ambient stuff. And like, it's incredible to listen to.
When I think about Bandcamp, I think about things like Cloud Kicker,
Yep.
where it's like somebody's done this really excellent thing really well, and this is the only way that it's going to get heard. It's like somebody's passion project, and it's so specific, but it finds an audience because of things like Bandcamp. And that I think is where you found it or where you bought it, at least. So I'm really happy that you included that, because I know that's like one of those like you and 12 other people know how great this thing is, but it's like largely unknown to a lot of people who even like music that sounds kind of like this.
So I had a late breaking edition too. I don't even know if you saw that I added this one. I added Introduction by Buried Inside off of this album Chroniclasts, and this is one of those times I'm really gonna have to like shut myself off from talking about it too much. But Buried Inside wrote this incredible concept album called Chroniclast. It is entirely about time and other frameworks with which you can use to understand the concept of time as a black metal album. It hit the spot at the right time, at the moment where I needed to like hear something like this and get super heavy into it. But point being, there were a couple of great records like this that came out at the time that did the like, we're in and we're out. We're doing a really hard song and then we're doing an interlude. another hard song, and then we're doing an interlude. And so like they did a really good job here on that record specifically of doing interludes that connected to other ones, that borrowed riffs and repeated them later on. Another record that did this really well was the original The Tiger and the Duke from The Sound of Animals Fighting. They would go in on a song, then come back to an interlude. The interludes themselves would have riffs that gets repeated later on and stuff. So Introduction is one of several that are on Chroniclast that are they're nearly Muzak in the way that they like lean back and take it really slow. And it's such a great introduction to that record, because in the context of this playlist, you'll never hear how absolutely nuts it actually gets when you listen to it in the context of the record. And I love it so much.
I always think of you when I think of Chroniclast. I never would have come across that record otherwise, but that is from a period where I like distinctly remember your taste getting really cerebral. You got into Chroniclast and Aeolian by the Ocean at the same time. And the first song on that record is just Edgar Allan Poe's The City and the Sea poem as the lyrics against this like really technical but ripping metal backdrop, right? So you had this like heavy, thinky type of subject matter and aesthetic against this really heavy, textural, huge, spacious, heavy music. And those are like some of the defining things I think about when I think about like when I'm trying to describe to people, oh, this guy that I've been friends with for a long time on the basis of music interest. He likes a lot of stuff that I would never go for in any other context. Like that's a very specific like target to shoot that I know you like, that you've kind of gotten me into. Chroniclast is such an interesting record I'd never listened to, but like specifically because you've been like, dude, it's about time and all of these different conceptualizations about the idea of time and how it's a relative framework. Like, oh yeah, man, that's tight. And I started listening to that record, and it made me think about time as a construct. Before that was a classic nihilist saying on the internet.
So Cloud Kicker and Buried Inside kind of also build towards this last kind of shift in the playlist for me, which is Clams Casino. So you're really pushing at this. Oh, it's so all day.
So good.
All day, man. But it starts to push towards this like, I want you to feel a way through the instrumentation, but I'm also kind of telling you something. Yeah. And like, it's tough to kind of understand Clams Casino, in my opinion, until you've heard it. Well, the best way to figure out Clams Casino is to realize what songs you've already heard that he produced that you had no idea about. And then you can hear all his instrumentals that he writes, and then you can really hear then the songs that he creates, that he collaborates with people on, and you can kind of hear the three different angles he takes. So the Rainforest EP, which Waterfalls comes off of here, was like, it just hit the spot in the right way. But it also made me think of, last episode, Kyle, we talked about the 3-6 song at the end, and you talked about if you were like putting it up for a soundtrack or something, that it would like for like a horror movie, that it might feel the right way. So one of the ways I came to love this song in particular is I was doing some like video production for a nonprofit a while back, a place that definitely, and I don't even mean this in a negative way, but like it would have been hard sell to be like, I'm going to bring in some Clams Casino who does some beats for some well-known rappers you may know. But since no one knew because it was instrumental, I was making like a teaser video, and it was this kind of like 30-second, really like grungy. It needed this like super kind of urban feel to it. And so this song became like completely interrelated with this video I made, which were just like these kind of motion tracking shots across different like pieces of concrete basically. So like we kind of like would put a little animated piece on like a curb or something like that, and like the camera would pan past it, and just like the way it hits this halftime beat and the way it distorts everything and then it really envelops, like Clams Casino does something different with your headphones than other people can do, period. And that's one of the reasons I include it here in instrumentals, because it's not just, this isn't just a beat like waiting on a lyricist to sit on top of it. Like he builds worlds with this production, and like Rainforest EP is a great place to get started with him, I think.
He's the halfway point. He's the answer to the question no one has ever asked. What's the halfway point between trap and new age? Like that record he did with Lil B is like sort of a new age spiritual type record. It's like spa music for people that like Future. He's so unique. His sound is so unique, and he's relegated to like the third tier of producer. But I mean, he helped put A$AP Rocky on the map. That first A$AP Rocky tape was just, it's still light years ahead of its time. And it's not really even available on streaming because it was a mixtape. But he's something else. And you're right. The way that it's kind of, a lot of his stuff is kind of blown out sounding, but there is still kind of a clarity is kind of a hallmark that works really well for him.
Next track, I don't need to talk about too much, but the reason I put Just Like You Imagine from Nine Inch Nails in here was because to me it takes some of that production that we just talked about from Clams Casino. So listen to this track and hear how sharp the percussion stands out. It feels separated, but not in a way where it feels like it's separated like in a pan sense. Like the actual like sound of it is dramatically clear to where you can focus on it and it feels like it's too loud. And then if you stop focusing on it, it feels like it's just right, which I think was not only good in borrowing from Clams Casino and like really using some of the oddities of the way that music comes to us through headphones to make production. So like not only does Nine Inch Nails already do that, but I also feel like it's pretty representative of like Nine Inch Nails, the live band, and the way that when you really hear a good, like really all-encompassing live band, there's a clarity to the percussion that is, if it were right here, it would be totally unbearable, and somehow it sits right here, and it sits there the whole time. So I just love the production of this. Now, Trent Reznor would probably have a small fit knowing that next up on this playlist is Broken Social Scene, the Friendly Canadians. But I thought it was a really good example, too. Hey, I like the Nine Inch Nails, too. Is this what Canadians do? Did they shrug their shoulders and say "hey" a lot?
Oh, in South Park.
I don't know. I always want to make Canadian jokes, but then, like, they're just super nice people who have a slightly different accent. It never works out really well. So... Broken Social Scene.
Just remember, Cliff, we Americans are the joke always.
Yeah, I found that out recently, I would say. So, Broken Social Scene is an awesome band, I think, to dive into for a couple of reasons. One is they're just like a collective of bands who were chilling out in Toronto who wanted to do good stuff together. And they, like, even when they talk about the record You Forgot It in People, which this track Pacific Theme comes off of, they said, you know, we'd already collectively or individually, we'd already made our art house albums like at this point in their life, they were already like, we already did our crazy shit. We'd like to just like kind of do some stuff that sounds and feels good. And so they said like the whole ideology of trying to write an actual 4-minute pop song was completely new to so many of us. And so You Forgot It in People was like a really well received and critically acclaimed release from this band. But it's also just another good like launching off point for the Toronto scene, because members like bands that created this band, Stars, Feist, Do Make Say Think, A Silver Mount Zion, like all of these bands were in the same city. And that's just a handful of them that like I enjoy and feel comfortable recommending. There's like 5 or 6 other ones that help make this collective, that are all respectively good bands. Just not ones I care about a ton.
Feist in particular is so awesome, dude.
That whole record is worth giving a spin, just to kind of feel the context of it. But then I want to like turn the intensity all the way down from Canada to 0, because like I really wanted to include a Tenerian song here. And like they approach musicality in a quite literally, but also conceptually foreign way to like any of the things that we've ever heard. And so Desert Wind is like, it's a really good way, I think, to in a more macro sense, the way we talked about like some of these bands like Buried Inside and Cloud Kicker, and some of these other bands will go hard and then go back and then loosen up and then go in hard and come back, and they do these all with like instrumentals. And Tenerian, especially here with Desert Wind, like you might think that this is a song of silence for a little while, because it's kind of the opposite of like the Sun or the Boris instrumental thing. Instead of really overwhelming you, it's like they intentionally underwhelm you, so that you've got to like, you have to have headphones, you have to have the volume turned up, and even then you're not totally sure what you're hearing the whole time. But they're a band that's so good at capturing the sensation of like, we are in a desert alone and there is nothing here and there's nothing around and there is no sound because there's nothing to bounce anything off of.
This song sounds like looking at a lot of stars. A very quiet exercise, but it's very loud inside. So there's not a lot of noise, ostensibly, but there's enough tone or something happening that you feel it reverberating in you really deeply. And it doesn't take much. It's beautiful. I mean, it's hard to do so little and have it do so much. But they do it really well here.
Speaking of what's hard to do, keeping these episodes short is hard to do. I just did the same thing that we talked about you not doing. We can't even talk about these songs for less than an hour. We're working on it. We love everybody. We're sorry it's long. But home stretch here. And this, like...
We promised to never do a Joe Rogan 3-hour. Never, ever. If it goes north of 75 minutes, we're dead.
Everyone's just sitting at home. It's fine. Plus... we make them stick around for the Beach Boys. I also, like, on top of Tenerian being a good example of some of the different things we talked about, I also explicitly wanted Desert Wind to come right before anything from Pet Sounds, but specifically Pet Sounds. Like, I feel like, first of all, it's probably an album we need to cover at some point anyway, but it's like you can never remember Pet Sounds enough. Like it to me, it feels like something that kind of like comes back to your mind. Like the Beach Boys are over there doing, She's Real Fine, My 409 and all of this stuff. And then you're just like, oh yeah, Pet Sounds. And then it hits you and then you listen to it and then you're blown away. And then it kind of goes away again for a while and comes back.
Are these the Be True to Your School guys? What's going on?
Yeah. The quote, most progressive pop album ever was Pet Sounds. And like, it's worth bringing up because it's worth making sure that everyone has listened to Pet Sounds recently and appreciated everything that's happening in it, because it was ambitious, it was complex, it was sophisticated, and it's still to this day considered to be one of the most influential albums in the history of modern music at all, right? But it's such a great, I think, encapsulation of all the different things that we've already talked about with what instrumentals can do, where it can be complex, it can be laid back, it can go in and out, it can create momentum, it can tell stories. Pet Sounds as an album manages to do a really good portion of all of this, as evidenced by the fact that like they essentially couldn't perform it after they recorded it because of how complex it actually was, and they certainly couldn't go out and do it just as the regular ass Beach Boys anymore. So like, but bringing in that complexity so that you could produce something as intricate as an instrumental like Pet Sounds itself is like, as much as I love Frankenstein as the kind of genesis of how I understood instrumentals, I feel like Pet Sounds is a good real encapsulation or conclusion of like how open-ended and how much complexity and possibility there is in an instrumental at all. There's so much that can be done. And again, just the simple fact that like the Beach Boys themselves were able to go in and make something this wild and this beloved and this complicated and complex, I feel like is again a really good encapsulation of when you put really smart and talented people in front of music and you say it's got to not have a vocal melody. We've got to literally kick that crutch out entirely, and you've got to make something else. Like, this is such a great encapsulation of what people can do when they're really talented and when they're all bought in on the concept. So we did it. We love talking about music. We just did it again for each of us, probably twice as long as we wanted to. And I bet each of us also feels like we probably didn't say like 80% of the shit that we wanted to say anyway. I know we both have at least 2 extra playlists that are like the things that didn't quite make the cut. Yeah. But this is such a great approach to music. I think like even instrumentals in general, I think help us understand better the songs that aren't instrumentals, and they help us listen for things that we don't know how to listen to unless we know how to pay attention to how instruments play along with one another.
Yeah, I think these playlists are good for the kind of listening that doesn't come very naturally to me, where you hone in on a detail. Like when you take one sense away, you take sight and smell away and you can taste better. You take vocals away and everything else gets amplified by 10 or 20%. So I would say with my playlist, again, it's really a lot more about feel. With your playlist, it's really about like hone in on details where you would be inclined to sit back a little because you don't have a vocal narrative guide. Be your own guide, like draw your own map as you're going through these things and find something like, oh, this thing up here on the right here, it's beautiful. It's like a lot of luminary moments. You got to work a little harder, but when you do, it's that much more rewarding with instrumentals.
Especially right now, man. Look, we just passed along 2 really awesome, totally instrumental playlists. Everybody's sitting their ass at home trying to figure out how to work right now anyway. You're trying to figure out if music can play a part of what you're doing anyway because everything's so distracting and overwhelming. Here's a couple of playlists. Give them a shot. When something connects with you, great, go down that rabbit hole and get some more stuff. Like, music can still be a part of this and can be a healthy exercise for us right now, but it takes intentionality, just like this podcast, man. So we genuinely hope that beyond just talking about the music, that the playlist, the kind of mixtapes and whatever that we've created will actually help you to integrate music into your life in this really weird time, maybe in a way that you didn't expect. So here's Monday's playlist, I guess.
Cheers to that.
Cheers, brother.